Marxism has swept through the world and captured the minds and hearts of human beings as only the great religions, Christianity and Islam, have done in human history. No other philosopher or social scientist has ever had a worldwide, international, organized following. What is the strange, commanding power that lies within the thought of Karl Marx?
Since the publication of Capital Volume 1 in 1867, the ideas of Karl Marx have guided revolutionary movements across the entire world and laid the groundwork for a scientific understanding of history and society. This short video is part 1 of a 3-part series that attempts to scratch the surface of Marx's ideas by providing a broad sketch of his theory through a discussion on his key arguments and concepts. These videos are by no means a substitute for Marx's texts themselves, but were made in hope to offer some encouragement in helping you find your way towards them and navigate through them yourself. References to Marx's texts mentioned here can be found at the links in the description below. Marx was a thinker who wore many hats. He was a journalist, historian, political economist, scientist, sociologist, labor activist, but most importantly, he was a socialist revolutionary that sought to change the world. The complexity of his thought is shaped by the many different points that he positions himself within the social totality that he is analyzing. What he is able to see and comprehend through one perspective or one point may be different or even contradict what he's able to see at another point within the same social totality. The sheer depth and scope of Marx's analysis is derived from his ongoing struggle to work out a scientific interpretation of the various contradictions he's confronted with in his analysis. This type of systematic scientific investigation into the social world is a method of inquiry that is now referred to as dialectical or historical materialism. The concept of dialectic was borrowed from Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who basically argued that world history unfolded through a struggle between ideas. For Hegel, society was in a continual process of working out contradictions between prevailing ideas that negate, clash, contradict, struggle, develop, and change with each other. The struggle between ideas creates contradictions that society tries to work out, but in the process new contradictions arise, and the history of human society continues to change and develop. Hegel referred to this movement as Geist, or the spirit of history, which ultimately unfolded with a purpose towards progress. Hegel argued that the progressive element of Geist, the spirit of history or historical dialectic, was in the movement towards freedom that reaches its final stage in the reconciliation between the subject and object, where all distinctions between man and external nature are dissolved. The concept materialism was taken from Ludwig Feuerbach's criticism of Christianity and God. Marx praised Feuerbach's materialism for demonstrating how religious idealism had its foundation and roots in objective material reality. Feuerbach argued that the Christian notion of God was an embodiment of all the divine qualities of humanity, projected from the earth into the heavens. He argued that God did not make man, but that man created God as his own perfect self-image, the image of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-caring, beautiful, truthful, and sublime image of man. In order for man to find God, he must first recognize himself in God as the ideal, perfect image of himself. Religion, therefore, separates all the finest qualities of humanity and places them outside of humans as something external to them. And in this way, Feuerbach argued, God is man's alienation from himself. Marx was greatly inspired by both of these thinkers, and turned them against each other by arguing that while Hegel had correctly identified the dialectical process of history, he misplaced the development of contradictions in the production and struggle of ideas, the reflection of reality rather than reality itself. On the other hand, while Feuerbach correctly identified the material basis of ideas and understood that ideas were only mere reflections of objective reality, he did not give his materialism a historical, social, or dialectical character. Hegel needed Feuerbach's materialism, and Feuerbach needed Hegel's historical dialectic. In short, the marriage between Hegel's concept of history and Feuerbach's concept of materialism would inspire Marx's method of historical or dialectical materialism and his general approach to his ruthless criticism of everything existing, namely political economy. In his analysis, Marx placed primacy on the process of production because he understood that it was the process by which society produces the material conditions of its own existence. He recognized that human societies must form a metabolic relationship with nature and develop cooperative forms of social production in order to first simply exist. As human beings satisfy their basic material needs for food, water, clothing, shelter, and so on, they shape their material life. The productive and material life of a society determines how that society will develop its unproductive activities in the sphere of culture, religion, politics, leisure, or any other non-economic activity or institution. Therefore, the manner in which a society satisfies its material needs shapes and determines the conditions under which different cultural, ideological, religious, artistic, or political possibilities may or may not emerge. This is why Marx loosely referred to the economy as the base of society, while describing other social processes, such as politics, religion, and culture, as the ideological superstructure of society. The superstructure initially emerges from the base of society, but becomes relatively autonomous and enacts its own influence back onto it. For most of anthropological history, the economic base of society was dominated by a mode of production that Marx's collaborator Friedrich Engels referred to as primitive communism. He used the term communism to highlight the fact that these prehistoric social formations were classless, stateless, and moneyless societies where private property did not exist. In these societies, everyone had free, open, and democratic access to the fruits of nature. Production and distribution of goods was highly egalitarian, and community members formed organic bonds that were highly ritualistic, cooperative, and mutualist. Marx sees the history of class struggle beginning with the emergence of slavery at approximately 6000 BCE, moving through the feudal epoch and into capitalism between the 15th and 18th century. Each stage in the history of human society is defined by how the forces of production, or technologies and human labor, are organized through the relations of production. As the technologies and technical knowledge of a society develop, the forces of production change and eventually create contradictions within the prevailing relations of production, which then go through a process of revolution. Throughout this history, relations of production give rise to class differences based on how labor and property are distributed across society. Slavery as a mode of production begins in Mesopotamian and Sumerian societies around 6000 BCE and eventually emerges across almost the entire world. Slavery is the first mode of production where private property and a class system emerge. Under slavery, the laborer is the property of the master. The master purchases the slave, owns the slave, and can sell or dispose of the slave like any other good. The slave class owns no property, provides all the social labor, and receives only a portion of the total value it creates. The master class owns all the property, does none of the labor, but appropriates the value produced by the labor of the slave class. Under this arrangement, the slave class is in constant struggle against the relations of production that exploit their labor, which eventually gives rise to irreconcilable antagonisms and contradictions that need to be resolved through a revolution that brings about a transformation in the mode of production. After thousands of years, the slavery mode of production generally collapses and gives rise to the feudal mode of production around the 5th century. Unlike the social formation of the ancient city-state, the feudal era comes to fruition in the countryside and creates a stark division between the town and country. Under feudalism, the upper class is no longer defined through property ownership in the form of slaves, but property ownership in the form of land. The worker is therefore no longer a slave owned by the master, but a peasant or serf who, having no land of their own, must work on the land owned by someone else, a landlord. The peasant class owns no property, does all the labor, but receives only a portion of the total value its labor creates. The landlord class owns all the property, does none of the labor, but appropriates the value produced by the peasant class. Conquests of empire, the emerging bourgeois class, and small-scale industry give expression to the contradictions between the forces and relations of production under the feudal era. By the end of the 15th century, feudalism begins to crumble and slowly gives rise to capitalism. The embryo of the capitalist mode of production begins with merchant capital in Italy during the time of the Renaissance in the 15th and 16th century. But it's not until the end of the 18th century that capitalism is recognized as a fundamentally distinct mode of production. Under capitalism, the ruling bourgeois class is no longer defined by productive relations based in the ownership of the worker or land, but in the ownership and control over the means of production. Under this mode of production, the working class proletariat does not own the means of production, does all of the work, but is compensated with only a portion of the total value it produces. On the other hand, the bourgeois class owns all of the property, does none of the work, but appropriates the value produced by the labor of the proletariat. Capitalism is a distinct mode of production that is characterized by a number of historical developments that emerge and correspond with each other, including mass commodity production, private ownership over the means of production, exchange relations, a social division of labor, wage labor, the generalization and crystallization of world money, among other things as well. Certain aspects of the capitalist system, such as money or private property, predate capitalism by millennia, but other aspects of capitalism, such as mass commodity production, are characteristic of the capitalist system itself. Capitalism is a system founded on a mode of production based on capital, which can loosely be defined as commodities such as raw materials, tools, or labor power that are set into motion to produce value. In other words, a capitalist will purchase commodities in order to sell them for more than what they cost, which as a process looks like this. Money is used to purchase commodities such as the means of production and labor power. They are mixed together through the production process to create a new commodity, C', which is then sold for the initial amount of money put forward plus accumulated money. Money, labor power, means of production, or commodities in general are not capital in themselves. They only become capital, like in the example here, when they produce commodities that sell for more than what they cost. The increase in money that the capitalist ends with compared to what he started with is what Marx referred to as surplus value. Capital and surplus value are two key components that are introduced in Marx's analysis of the capitalist system. They are concepts that help demystify the mysterious way in which capital presents itself as a goose that lays golden eggs, a form of value that produces value. For this discussion, check out Part 2 on surplus value and exploitation. This video was made possible by the generous support of my patrons. If you would like to join them, you can head over to patreon.com/redpenyoutube.